It was a cold, rainy night when Sophia made her decision. She stood at the door of the small apartment she had shared with Daniel for the past 2 years, feeling a mixture of emotions swirl inside her chest. Her heart ached with every beat, but her mind remained resolute. She was about to say goodbye to the man she had once loved, the man who had given her everything, except for one thing: money. And it was money that had become the force driving her toward a future she never thought she'd choose. Daniel, with his kind eyes and gentle soul, was everything a woman could want in a partner. He wasn't wealthy by any means, but he had a heart of gold. Every day he worked tirelessly at his job as a mechanic, always striving to give Sophia the life she deserved. He'd come home exhausted, yet he would greet her with a smile and a warmth that made her feel cherished. But despite all his love, something was missing. Something Sophia couldn't ignore any longer. It was the lack of financial security. Sophia's family had always placed importance on wealth, status, and connections. She was raised in a world where money was everything. Her parents were wealthy business owners, and they had instilled in her the belief that a good life was only possible if you had money. And now, Sophia was standing on the precipice of the life she had been raised to desire. A life with luxury, security, and prestige. She had met Thomas, a man whose wealth was beyond anything she had ever imagined. He was a billionaire, successful, powerful, and handsome. The moment they met, Sophia knew her life would never be the same. Thomas had swept her off her feet with his charm, his lavish gifts, and his promises of a future that would fulfill all her dreams. He had given her everything she had ever wanted, except, perhaps, true love. But as the days went on, the truth became more and more apparent. She could not ignore the growing divide between Daniel and her newfound life with Thomas. Daniel's love was real, but it was rooted in something far more humble. Sophia, however, could not shake the feeling that she was meant for more. She had been conditioned to think that wealth was the key to happiness. And now, standing at the threshold of everything she had ever dreamed of, she found herself torn. The decision was simple on paper. Choose the man who loved her, who would always have her back, or choose the man who could give her the life she had been taught to crave. A life of luxury, ease, and endless possibilities. The life she had dreamed of since childhood. She had to choose. As Sophia stood there, staring at Daniel who was sitting on the couch, looking at her with confusion and hurt in his eyes, her heart broke. His eyes were filled with questions, but she couldn't find the words to answer. How could she explain this to him? How could she make him understand that, despite his love, she needed more than just affection? She needed the stability, the glamour, the success. She needed what Thomas could offer her. "Are you leaving?" Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts, his words like a slap to her face. He didn't understand, and she could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his gaze faltered. She had always thought they were meant to be together. But now, standing on the brink of her decision, Sophia realized how fragile that bond had always been. "I have to go, Daniel," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to, but I have to." Daniel's face twisted in pain, and for a moment, he was silent. He didn't ask her why or beg her to stay. He had known for a while that something was different, that the woman he loved had been slipping away from him. But hearing her confirm it, hearing her say the words out loud, made it all too real. "I don't understand," he finally said, his voice strained. "I've given you everything I can, everything I have. What else do you need?" "I need more, Daniel," Sophia whispered, choking back tears. "I need a future that's secure, that's full of promise. I need something that I can't get here." Daniel stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And you think you'll get that with him?" he spat, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and sadness. "You think that's the kind of life you want? A life built on money, on status? That's not love, Sophia. You're making a mistake." Sophia closed her eyes, her chest tightening as her emotions swirled. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he didn't understand. But in the depths of her heart, she knew he was right. The life she was choosing wasn't love. It was security. It was a life of comfort, a life where she could live without fear of losing everything. But love wasn't enough anymore. At least, not the kind of love Daniel offered her. "I'm sorry," Sophia said softly, her voice breaking. "I wish it were different. I wish I could love you the way you love me. But I can't." With those words, she turned and walked out of the door, leaving Daniel behind. As she walked out into the night, the rain poured down, matching the heaviness in her heart. She had made her choice, and she couldn't turn back now. But with every step, the weight of her decision grew heavier, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just left behind the one thing that truly mattered: love. The next day, Sophia found herself in Thomas's arms, surrounded by the luxury she had always dreamed of. But as she looked out the window of his mansion, staring at the sprawling gardens and the sparkling pool, she couldn't ignore the emptiness inside her. She had everything she had ever wanted, but the one thing that mattered most, the one thing she had just thrown away, was missing, and that was love. The days that followed were a blur of expensive dinners, extravagant parties, and lavish gifts. Sophia had everything she could ever want, but nothing felt right. She smiled for the cameras, she posed for the social media influencers, but all she could think about was Daniel. Daniel, who had always loved her without asking for anything in return. Daniel, who had given her everything he had and more. But now, it was too late. She had made her choice. Sophia realized too late that she had given up the one thing that mattered most for the one thing that could never fill the void in her heart: wealth. And as she sat alone in her new mansion, surrounded by all the things she had dreamed of, Sophia knew deep down that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The day after the wedding, she wakes up to an incredible reality. The lavish mansion, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, it's everything she ever dreamed of. Yet, as she walks through the extravagant halls of her new home, a feeling of emptiness lingers. She's surrounded by wealth, but she can't shake the sensation that something is missing from her life. The once energetic and passionate woman she was now feels detached, like a stranger in her skin. The glimmer of gold and diamonds seems to overshadow the warmth and affection she once longed for. As the days pass, she realizes that while her material desires are all fulfilled, the emotional void in her heart remains. She starts to miss the simpler times with the man she rejected, the true connection that felt genuine. The lavish gifts and events blur in comparison to the love she once had, though she's too proud to admit it to herself. Meanwhile, her husband, although caring and generous, is constantly busy, leaving her alone with her thoughts and growing sense of discontent. She finds herself increasingly torn between the life she has now and the one she could have had. The people around her, the social events, the attention, all seem to amplify her loneliness. Is it the wealth she was after, or was it something deeper? She feels trapped in a gilded cage, with every desire satisfied except the one that truly mattered. She yearns for the simplicity and realness of a love that money can't buy, and the deeper connection that once felt possible, but now seems lost. As she reflects on her choices, a question haunts her. Was it worth it? As her thoughts spiral, she begins to confront the reality of her situation, understanding that no amount of wealth can fill the emotional void she feels. The fairy tale life she's living starts to feel more like a hollow dream, and she realizes that no amount of money can ever replace true happiness and love. For years, he lived in the shadows, keeping his true identity a closely guarded secret. Everyone around him believed he was just another ordinary man trying to make a living. He had built his life with hard work and determination, but what they didn't know was that behind the facade of poverty, he was someone far more important. The truth was, he was born into a royal bloodline, the heir to a vast fortune and power that could change his life forever. But due to family circumstances, he was forced to live a life of anonymity, hiding his true lineage to avoid danger and unwanted attention. His parents had been part of a scandal that had shattered the royal family's reputation, and to protect himself, he was raised far from the palace, in a modest home with people who didn't know his true heritage. As he grew older, he realized that his destiny was much greater than he ever imagined, but he struggled with the weight of his secret. He could never tell anyone the truth, even those closest to him, out of fear of exposing his past and the consequences it would bring. The journey to uncover his family's history was a lonely one, filled with questions that had no easy answers. Yet, through his quiet determination, he began piecing together the mystery of his heritage, seeking out clues and learning about the royal bloodline that lay dormant in him. His life, which had once seemed like an endless struggle, now had a deeper meaning. He started to understand the responsibilities that came with his identity and the legacy that he carried within him. But revealing this truth meant he would have to leave behind everything he had built, everything he had fought for, and everyone who knew him as the man he was. The internal battle between the life he had and the future that awaited him became an ongoing conflict. Could he embrace his true identity without losing everything he had come to love? Could he still be the man he wanted to be, even with the weight of a royal title looming over him? His journey was just beginning, but the more he uncovered, the more he realized that the secret of his bloodline held the key to everything. It would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. But with the discovery came new threats and challenges, as enemies who once thought him weak would soon learn the truth about the man they had underestimated. As he stood on the precipice of a new life, he had to decide if he was ready to claim his royal heritage and step into a world where power and wealth awaited, or if he would stay hidden in the life he had made for himself. But even as he grappled with this life-altering decision, he couldn't help but think about her, the woman he had once loved, the woman who had rejected him. Would she ever see him for who he truly was? Would she recognize the man he had become, or would she forever be trapped in the illusion of the poor man she had left behind? The secret journey of his bloodline was far from over, and it would take everything he had to navigate the twists and turns that awaited him. His true identity was a ticking time bomb, and soon the world would know the truth. No longer a poor man, but a prince with a destiny far beyond anything he had ever dreamed. She had once believed in the fairy tale, the dream of a perfect life with the man who had swept her off her feet. He had been everything she had ever wanted: charming, wealthy, and someone who could offer her a life of luxury and comfort. She had fallen for him deeply, and for a while, it felt like she was living in a dream. But that dream was beginning to show cracks, and those cracks were getting harder to ignore. The decision she had made years ago, the one that had torn her away from the man she truly loved, was starting to haunt her in ways she never expected. She had chosen wealth, status, and security over love, thinking that these things would bring her happiness. But as time passed, she realized that what she had gained was nothing compared to what she had lost. The fairy tale that she thought she had found with the wealthy man had slowly become a cage, one that trapped her in a life of superficiality and emptiness. The lavish parties, the expensive clothes, and the endless luxuries meant little to her now. All she could think about was the one decision that had changed everything. The moment she had walked away from the poor man she once loved, the man who had given her his heart, only to be rejected for a life of wealth. At first, it had seemed like the right choice. She had convinced herself that love alone wasn't enough to sustain a relationship, that she needed stability, security, and the promise of a future filled with material wealth. But as the years passed, those things no longer seemed as important. She began to realize that the love she had rejected was worth far more than all the riches in the world. The reality of her decision was sinking in. The man she had married was kind and generous, but their relationship was built on a foundation of convenience, not passion. There was no spark, no deep emotional connection. The love she once shared with him had faded, leaving a sense of emptiness that she couldn't ignore any longer. She had everything she thought she wanted, yet it felt like she had nothing. Every time she looked at her husband, she saw the life she had chosen, but not the life she had dreamed of. And when she thought of the poor man, one she had walked away from, her heart ached. She had chosen the wrong path, and now the consequences of that choice were becoming painfully clear. What had started as a fairy tale had become a nightmare, and she was trapped in a life that wasn't hers. The whispers of regret filled her mind every day. She had pushed the love of her life away for a dream that wasn't as perfect as it seemed. But it wasn't just the emptiness of her marriage that troubled her. It was the knowledge that the man she had rejected, the one she had once seen as beneath her, was now someone far greater than she could have ever imagined. She had no idea that he was hiding a secret, one that would have changed everything. The poor man she had turned away was no longer poor. He had transformed into someone who could have offered her everything she had wanted, and more. He had become powerful, successful, and someone whose life was now far beyond her reach. The thought of him had once been a distant memory, a part of her past that she had buried deep inside. But now, the reality of what she had lost was impossible to ignore. The fairy tale she had dreamed of had come at a price that she hadn't realized she was paying until it was too late. The cracks in her fairy tale were deepening, and the guilt of her decision was weighing heavily on her soul. She could never undo the past, and the love she had once felt for the man who had once been her everything seemed like a distant dream. But as she stood at the crossroads of her life, she had to decide if she could live with the consequences of her choice, or if she would try to find a way to make things right. The man she had left behind was no longer the same person. He had moved on, built his life, and perhaps found love again. She had no idea if she could ever make amends, but the cracks in her fairy tale were growing, and the price of her decision was becoming too heavy to carry. The life she had carefully crafted, the one she had chosen over the love of her life, was starting to crumble in ways she hadn't anticipated. The lavish lifestyle, the designer clothes, the expensive dinners, all of it felt meaningless now. It was a strange feeling of emptiness, and it wasn't just the hollow nature of her marriage that was causing it. There was something bigger, something far more powerful that had disrupted the life she thought she had built. It all started with an unexpected invitation to a high-profile gala, one she couldn't miss, one that seemed like the perfect occasion to flaunt her wealth and her high society connections. But as she entered the grand hall, her eyes froze on a figure standing across the room. There he was, the man she had walked away from years ago, the man she had once rejected for a life of wealth and status. But this time, he wasn't just any man. He was different. The man who once struggled to make ends meet, the one she had dismissed as too poor for her, was now standing before her like a vision of something she couldn't comprehend. His demeanor was confident, his presence commanding, and the people around him treated him with a level of respect she had never seen before. She blinked, thinking she must be imagining things, but as her gaze locked with his, it was clear. The man she had left behind wasn't just any man. He wasn't poor anymore. He wasn't struggling anymore. He had transformed, and in a way she couldn't have predicted. The man she had walked away from had become a prince. Her heart raced as her mind tried to process the reality of the situation. How was this possible? The man she had chosen not to love was now someone she could never have imagined. She had left him all those years ago, thinking he would remain stuck in his poverty forever. But now he was standing at the center of the room, surrounded by people who respected him, honored him, and treated him as royalty. How had it all happened? How had he gone from the man she had once deemed not good enough to a prince, someone of immense power, wealth, and influence? It was a shock, a complete and utter shock to her system. She had never imagined that the man she had rejected would be the one to rise so high. And now, standing in front of her, he was everything she had ever wanted in a partner. A man of strength, intelligence, and success. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. As she stood there, frozen, he caught her gaze and smiled. The kind of smile that held so many layers of emotion. There was no bitterness, no anger, just an odd sense of peace in his eyes. He walked toward her slowly, and with every step, it felt like the world was shifting. His movements were confident, his posture upright and commanding. The years of struggle and pain that she had seen him endure seemed like distant memories. He was no longer the man who had once fought for her love. He had evolved into something far greater than she had ever imagined. "It's good to see you again," he said, his voice calm and composed with no trace of resentment. But she knew it was there. She knew there had to be something beneath that composed exterior. After all, she had rejected him, left him for a life that she thought would bring her happiness. But now, seeing him before her, she realized how wrong she had been. "I never imagined I'd see you like this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. His smile deepened, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Neither did I," he replied softly. "But sometimes life takes us on paths we never expect." The conversation seemed to hang in the air between them. She had so many questions, but she didn't know where to begin. How had he become a prince? Had he been hiding his true identity all along? Or had something extraordinary happened that changed his life forever? Her mind raced, but all she could focus on was the man standing before her. The man who had once been everything to her. The one she had let slip away. And now, he was someone she could never have again. Her marriage, her wealth, her luxurious life, all of it felt insignificant compared to what she was witnessing now. The man she had rejected had become someone who not only had everything she had wanted, but so much more. And yet, despite all of his success, there was a sense of distance between them now. He had changed, and she had changed. Their lives had taken separate paths, and now it was impossible to find a way back to what they once had. She stood there, feeling the weight of the decision she had made all those years ago. She had left him, thinking she was making the right choice. But now, faced with the reality of who he had become, she realized just how wrong she had been. The love she had rejected was now the love that had risen far beyond her reach. The room around them seemed to fade away as they stood there. Two people from different worlds. One who had chosen wealth and comfort, and the other who had chosen his own path, rising to greatness against all odds. And now, she was left to wonder if it was too late to right the wrongs of the past. Was there any chance that she could be part of his life again? Or had she missed her chance forever? It was the kind of day she would never forget. A day that felt like the universe had conspired to bring her face to face with her past. She had always thought she was over him, that the decision she made all those years ago to leave him behind for a life of wealth was the right one. But deep down, she had always known that something was missing. That something was him. The man she had once loved, the one she had walked away from for a life of comfort and luxury. Life had been everything she thought she wanted. But as she looked at the life she had built, it felt empty, devoid of meaning. She had the money, the status, and the high society connections, but none of it had ever been able to replace the man who had once held her heart. It was during one of her frequent charity events, a gala designed to showcase her status in the upper echelons of society, that she saw him again. There he was, standing across the room, as if the years had melted away. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his confidence undeniable. But there was something else about him, something more powerful. He wasn't just the man she had left behind. He had transformed into someone who commanded attention, someone whose presence made people stop and stare. He was no longer the poor man she had dismissed. He was a man of immense wealth, power, and influence. And he was here, in her world, in a way she never expected. As she made her way through the crowd, trying to shake off the shock of seeing him after all these years, their eyes locked. Time seemed to stop for a moment, and the noise of the event faded into the background. For that brief second, it was as if no time had passed at all. He was still the same man who had once been everything to her, and yet, he was no longer the person she had left behind. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and made her way toward him. "It's been a long time," she said, her voice a mixture of emotions. She didn't know whether to feel regret, relief, or something else entirely. The words felt awkward, as if the space between them had grown too wide to bridge with just a simple greeting. He smiled, a smile that wasn't bitter or filled with anger, but rather one that held the weight of everything they had both been through. "It has," he replied, his voice calm, composed. But there was something in his eyes, a sadness, perhaps, or maybe just the understanding that things between them could never go back to what they were. There was no anger in him, no resentment. She couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had chosen the life she thought she wanted, but it had come with a price, one she had been paying in silence for years. The decision to walk away from him had haunted her in ways she never admitted to anyone, not even herself. "So, how did this happen?" she asked, gesturing to the man standing before her, the man who now seemed to belong to a world far beyond hers. "How did you become this?" Her voice cracked slightly as the weight of the question hit her. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a moment to study her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a small sigh, he began to speak, as if this was a story he had told countless times before, but one he had never fully shared with anyone. "You left me," he said softly, "and at first, I didn't understand why. I thought it was because of who I was that I wasn't good enough. But then I realized that I wasn't the one you were running away from. You were running from something inside yourself. You were chasing a life that was never going to fulfill you, no matter how much wealth you acquired. I realized that I couldn't be the person to give you that happiness, not then, and not now." Her heart tightened as his words cut through her. He was right. She had run away from him, from the life they could have built together. But not because of who he was. It was because she was afraid. Afraid of being tied down, of missing out on the glittering, glamorous life that had promised everything she thought she needed. "I never thought you would forgive me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought I could ever make things right." His gaze softened. "Forgiveness isn't about what's been done in the past. It's about understanding where we are now. We've both changed. I'm not the man you left behind, and you're not the woman you were back then, either." They stood there, the space between them still vast, yet somehow filled with the possibility of something new. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't angry with her anymore. He had moved on, grown into a man she could never have imagined. But as she looked at him, she realized that something was missing despite the wealth, power, and success. He had become everything she had once dreamed of, but had done it on his terms. And that, more than anything, made him even more captivating to her. "I don't expect anything from you," he continued, his voice low, "but I can't ignore the fact that we have unfinished business. I don't know what that means yet, but I'm willing to find out." It was a chance to correct the past. But was it too late? Could they ever bridge the gap that had grown between them over the years? Or was this just another meeting that would fade into the background of their lives? As she stood there, facing the man she had once loved and lost, she realized that she had been given a rare opportunity. Not just to make amends, but to finally understand what truly mattered in life. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to find happiness. Not in the wealth and the status she had once sought, but in the one thing she had left behind: love. The wedding bells rang in the distance, but all she could hear was the heavy silence of her thoughts. She had everything she ever dreamed of: wealth, status, and a life of luxury that many people envied. But none of it felt real. None of it felt like it was hers. The man she had chosen to marry was everything her parents had hoped for: rich, influential, and perfect in every way on the outside. But deep inside, she felt empty, hollow, as if something was missing, something vital to her happiness. She couldn't ignore the void that had only grown larger over the years. It wasn't until today, as she stood at the edge of her perfect life, that she realized what had always been missing: him. The man she had left behind, the man who had once been her everything, was the one she truly wanted. The man who had been discarded in favor of money and status was the one she had taken for granted. The man who, now, seemed to have everything. Everything but the one thing she had once denied him, her love. The truth was undeniable, and it gnawed at her every day. She had made a choice, and the price of that choice had been higher than she could have ever imagined. The more she tried to convince herself that the life she had built was everything she needed, the more she realized that it was a facade. She had been chasing a dream, but the reality was far different. The glimmering world of wealth and prestige had never filled her heart. It had only served to mask the truth that she had made the wrong choice. She had walked away from the one man who truly loved her for who she was, not for the money, or the status that came with being in her world. He had never asked for anything. He had never demanded that she choose him over her dreams, but deep down, she had known he was the one who could make her happy. Yet, she had turned her back on him, believing that she needed more than love. She needed wealth. She needed security, and she had gotten it all. But at what cost? The more she thought about it, the more the memories of him came rushing back. She remembered the way he had held her when she was scared, the way he had listened when no one else did. She remembered how his touch had made her feel safe, how his love had been a refuge in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. He had been her protector, her confidant, her partner in every sense of the word. But when the pressure of her world had become too much to handle, she had pushed him away, convinced that he wasn't enough for her. She had believed the lies she told herself, that money, status, and power would bring her the happiness she sought. But now, standing in her perfect world, she realized that those things had never been enough. They had only kept her from the one thing that truly mattered. The moment she saw him again, everything had changed. Seeing him as he was now, a man who had grown into someone powerful, successful, and confident, had shattered the illusions she had built around herself. He had become everything she had once hoped for, and more. The man she had left behind had transformed into someone beyond her reach. Someone whose life no longer needed her approval. He was no longer the man she could control, no longer the man who needed her. He had become the kind of person she had always dreamed of being, but without her by his side. And that realization hit her harder than she could have ever expected. Without her by his side. And that realization hit her harder than she could have ever expected. She had made a choice, and now she had to live with it. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself that her life was perfect, that everything she had worked for was enough, the truth continued to linger in the back of her mind. She had lost him. She had lost the man who had once been the center of her world. And now, she was left with nothing but the hollow echo of what could have been. Her world, for all its glamour, felt empty. The life she had built seemed meaningless without the one person who had once made everything worth it. She couldn't help but wonder, was it too late to fix it? Was there any hope left for them? Or had she already destroyed everything with her decision? He had moved on, and she had no right to expect anything from him. He had built a life without her, and she had to accept that. But as much as she wanted to convince herself that it was too late, a part of her couldn't let go of the thought that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. As the days passed and the wedding approached, the regret weighed heavier on her heart. She couldn't stop thinking about the love she had left behind, the love that had been real and pure. And now, it seemed like a distant memory. She had traded that love for a life that seemed perfect on the surface, but lacked the depth and fulfillment that she had once found in him. She had made a choice, but now she couldn't undo it. She had everything but the one thing that had always mattered. And that one thing was the only thing she truly needed. The regret became overwhelming as she continued to reflect on her past choices. She had tried to justify her actions, telling herself that she had made the right decision, that her life would be better for it. But now, she knew better. Now she realized that the love she had left behind was the only thing that would ever truly make her happy. She had been blinded by the pursuit of wealth and status, but now, she saw it clearly. Her happiness had never been about money or social standing. It had always been about him. The one man who had loved her with a sincerity that no amount of wealth could ever replace. As her wedding day drew nearer, she was faced with a painful truth. She had everything she thought she wanted, but nothing that truly mattered. She had been so focused on the future that she had ignored the past. And now, the past was calling her back, reminding her of what she had lost. Would she continue down the path she had chosen? Or would she find the courage to face the truth and make a decision that could change her life forever? The weight of her regret was heavy. But it was also a reminder of the love she had lost. The love that had been real, honest, and unwavering. And no matter how much she tried to ignore it, that love would always be a part of her, reminding her of what could have been, what should have been, and what she still longed for in her heart. The moment the announcement was made, everything changed. Her world, which had always seemed so carefully constructed, began to crumble. She had thought she was ready. She had thought that all her decisions had been made with purpose, that her life was on track for the future she had always envisioned. She had it all: wealth, status, and the man who could offer her everything her heart had ever desired. But as the words echoed in the room, "I'm getting married," the world she had built around herself began to shatter. It wasn't the marriage announcement itself that sent a shockwave through her. No, it was the identity of the man she was marrying. It was the stark reminder that the man who had once held her heart, the man she had abandoned for a life of luxury, was now out of her reach. He was gone. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and in that moment, her perfect world seemed like a distant memory. She had made her choice. She had traded love for security, and now it was too late. She looked at him across the room, his face radiating the confidence and joy she had always imagined him to have. But now it was directed at someone else. The woman he was with wasn't her. It wasn't her that he loved. It was she, the one who had rejected him. The one who had turned her back on everything that had once mattered. The pang of regret that gripped her heart was so sharp it almost physically hurt. She couldn't breathe. The weight of her decision was suffocating. The man who had once been her everything, the man who had loved her unconditionally, was now about to marry someone else. She had always believed she could have everything: wealth, power, status, and love. But now she realized how wrong she had been. None of those things could ever replace the one thing she had lost: him. The engagement ring sparkled on the finger of the woman beside him, and with every passing second, the sight of it seemed to mock her. She had been the one to let him go. She had been the one to say no when he had offered her everything. And now, someone else would reap the rewards of his love. Someone else would share in the joy and the life that she could have had. The thought of it was unbearable. She couldn't stop replaying the moments in her mind, the way he had looked at her, the way he had loved her so purely, so completely. He had been everything to her once, but she had walked away from it all. And now, standing here, watching him move on, she knew that there was no going back. The pain of seeing him with someone else was more than she could bear. It was as if a door had been slammed shut on everything they had once shared. The man who had once fought for her, the man who had loved her with everything he had, was now someone else's. The realization struck her with the force of a lightning bolt. She had lost him forever. As she stood there, watching the scene unfold before her, memories began flooding her mind. She remembered the way he used to look at her, the tenderness in his eyes, the way he held her close when things felt uncertain. She remembered the quiet moments, the simple conversations they had shared, the laughter that had filled the air when they were together. She remembered the warmth of his touch, the comfort of his presence. And then, it hit her harder than anything before. She had walked away from all of that. For what? For money? For status? For a life that had promised so much but ultimately gave her nothing? She had sacrificed the one thing that truly mattered. She had traded love for security. And now, that choice was coming back to haunt her. She had thought she could live without him. that she could find happiness in the trappings of wealth and power. But now, looking at him, seeing how much he had grown and changed, she realized how wrong she had been. She had lost the one thing that made her life worth living. As the announcement echoed in the room once again, her heart shattered. The thought of him marrying someone else was too much to bear. She had wanted to believe that she could move on, that she could convince herself that her life was better without him. But now, she knew the truth. He was irreplaceable. He was the one who had always been there for her, the one who had loved her when no one else did. He was the one who had seen her for who she truly was, and yet she had let him go. The weight of her mistake was unbearable. She glanced at the woman standing beside him. She couldn't help but feel a sense of jealousy rise within her. The woman was everything she wasn't: secure, confident, and calm. She wasn't haunted by regret. She wasn't plagued by the memories of what could have been. She was the one who had everything now, everything that had once belonged to her. She had taken his love, and now she would have him for the rest of her life. The bitter sting of that realization was almost too much to handle. She had been foolish, naive even, to think she could ever replace the man she had lost. The crowd continued to applaud as the announcement was made. The cheers were deafening, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. The noise faded into the background as her mind spiraled, each thought more painful than the last. She had chosen the wrong path, and now she was paying the price. She had no one to blame but herself. The truth was undeniable. She had made a choice, and now it was too late to take it back. He was no longer hers. He had moved on. He had found someone who could give him the love and companionship she had once offered him. And now, she was left with nothing. Nothing but the crushing weight of her regret. The wedding announcement was the final confirmation she needed. It was the moment she realized that she had lost him forever. As the days passed, the reality of her situation became clearer. She would never be able to go back and change what had happened. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. The man who had once been her everything was now someone else's. She would never again have the chance to tell him how much she had loved him, how much she had regretted walking away. She had let him go, and now she was left with the painful truth that she would never have him back. Her perfect world, the one she had fought so hard to build, now felt like a hollow shell. All the wealth, the power, the status. It all seemed meaningless without the one thing that truly mattered. Without him. The wedding announcement had confirmed what she had known all along. She had lost him. And now, there was no way to fix it. The realization that she had lost him forever hit her harder than she could have ever imagined. The guilt gnawed at her insides, eating away at her every waking moment. The wedding announcement had confirmed it. He was no longer hers, and in that moment, it felt like her world had come crashing down. She had made her choice, and now it seemed like it was too late to undo the damage. The luxury, the wealth, the comfortable life she had worked so hard to build, none of it mattered. All she could think about was him, the man she had once loved, the one who had offered her everything she had ever wanted, the one who had truly seen her for who she was. But now, it was too late. He had moved on, and as much as she tried to convince herself that she was better off, deep down, she knew the truth. She couldn't live without him. She had to see him again. There was no other option. Desperation took hold of her like an uncontrollable fire. It was all-consuming. She had to make things right. She had to try to fix the mess she had made. The thought of him being with someone else was unbearable. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, but it wasn't the same anymore. He was no longer hers to hold, no longer hers to love. He was slipping away from her, and she couldn't let that happen. But how could she fix something that was already broken? How could she undo the hurt, the pain, the mistakes of the past? She had no answers, only a burning desire to see him one last time, to beg him for a chance to make things right. So, she started looking for him. She searched through every corner of her life. hoping to find some trace of him. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. He had deliberately distanced himself from her after everything that had happened. She had betrayed him, humiliated him, and turned her back on everything they had shared. He had no reason to want to see her again. But still, the desperation wouldn't let go. She called his friends, his family, anyone who might know where he was, anything that might lead her to him. But every lead ended in dead ends. He had vanished from her life. He had moved on, and now it seemed like there was no way to reach him. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't give up. There had to be a way. She had to see him again, even if it meant facing the consequences of her actions, even if it meant swallowing her pride. She had to know if there was even the slightest chance to repair what she had broken. The weeks turned into months, and the search for him became an obsession. Her life, once filled with all the luxuries she had ever dreamed of, now felt empty and meaningless. She had everything, yet it all felt hollow. The material things couldn't fill the hole in her heart. Only he could. She began attending the places she knew he liked to visit. She went to his favorite cafe, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. She waited at the locations where they had once shared happy memories, but he was nowhere to be found. It felt like he had vanished from the world entirely. The rejection from him had been hard to bear, but the not knowing where he was, what he was doing, or who he was with was even harder. She couldn't bear the thought of him living a life without her, especially knowing that she had been the one to push him away. The weight of her choices was crushing her. Every moment without him felt like a punishment. She had never realized how much she truly needed him until it was too late. She spent her days in a haze, endlessly searching for him, trying to find a way back into his life. But the more she searched, the more she felt like the distance between them grew. There was no easy way to fix this. Her thoughts were consumed by him. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her when they were together, the way he had believed in her, the way he had stood by her through everything. He had always been there for her, and now it seemed like he was completely out of reach. Every time she thought about him, it was like a fresh wound reopened. The regret was unbearable. She had thrown away a love so pure, so genuine, for the sake of wealth, for the sake of status. And now she was paying the price. Every time she thought she had made the right choice, every time she tried to convince herself that she had done what was best for her, it felt like a lie. It wasn't what she wanted. She wanted him. She wanted the life they had shared, the life she had taken for granted. But she had lost it all. Desperation turned into obsession. She couldn't let go of the past. She couldn't let go of him. She needed to see him again, to explain herself, to tell him how sorry she was for everything. But as time went on, the realization began to set in. He was moving on. He had his own life now, a life without her. And no matter how much she searched for him, no matter how many places she visited, she couldn't escape the truth. He had let her go. And now, it was too late. She had waited too long. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But still, the desperation didn't subside. Every day she hoped that somehow, some way, he would come back into her life. She would continue to search for him, continue to hold on to the hope that things could be different. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had lost him. And no amount of searching, no amount of regret, could change that. The man who had once been everything to her was now a distant memory, a painful reminder of everything she had thrown away. But even with that truth in her heart, she still couldn't let go. She couldn't stop hoping, couldn't stop wishing that somehow she could make it right. But the chances were slipping away. He was gone. And she was left with nothing but the desperation of her own choices. And so, she continued searching, hoping that one day, she might find him again. But with each passing day, it seemed less and less likely. The man she had lost, the man she had walked away from, was now a part of her past. And no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she longed for him, it was never going to be the same again. The desperation would remain, but the reality was undeniable. She had lost him forever. The tension in the air was thick as she waited for him to arrive. The moment she had dreaded for so long was finally upon her. She had tried to avoid it, tried to convince herself that the past could remain buried. But now, the truth could no longer be hidden. Her heart raced as she paced back and forth, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had made a decision, a choice that had set them on this path of destruction. And now it was time to face the consequences. She had been running from the truth for so long, but now there was no escape. It was time to confront everything. The lies, the betrayal, the mistakes that had led to this moment. Her mind kept replaying the events, the moments where things had gone wrong, the moments when she had made the choice that would change everything. She had chosen the easy way out, the path of wealth and security, and in doing so, she had lost him. The man she had once loved, the one who had stood by her through everything, was now a stranger. The guilt weighed heavily on her shoulders as she thought about how she had betrayed his trust. She had seen the pain in his eyes when she had walked away, but she had justified her actions, convincing herself that she was doing what was best for her. She had convinced herself that he didn't understand, that he couldn't give her the life she wanted. But now, as she waited for him, she realized how wrong she had been. She had chosen the wrong path. And now, it was too late to undo it. She had to face him, to confront him, to answer for her actions. The door opened, and he stepped inside. She couldn't help but feel a wave of emotion rush over her as she looked at him. He was still the same man she had once known, but there was something different about him now. He was no longer the man she had known, a man full of love, hope, and dreams. He had changed. The world had changed him, and as she looked into his eyes, she knew that there was no going back. The past had shaped him, and there was no way to undo the damage. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice cold, distant. He didn't seem angry, just resigned to the situation. It was as if he had already accepted the reality that they were no longer the same. She could feel the distance between them, the years that had passed, the walls that had been built up. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? How could she explain the pain she had caused him, the regret she had lived with every day since she had made her choice? The silence between them was suffocating. Finally, she found her voice. I need to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. "I need you to know how sorry I am. I made a terrible mistake. I walked away from you when I should have stayed. I chose the wrong thing. And I lost you." He didn't respond right away, and she felt the weight of his silence. She couldn't tell what he was thinking, what he was feeling. Was he angry? Did he still care? Or had he truly moved on, as it seemed? She could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes avoided hers. It was as if he was holding something back, something he was afraid to say. "You don't need to apologize," he said finally, his voice steady but distant. "You did what you thought was best. I get that now." "No, you don't understand," she pleaded, stepping closer to him. "I was selfish. I chose money, I chose security, and I thought that would make me happy. But it didn't. I made the wrong choice, and I lost you." She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but she forced herself to stay composed. She couldn't break down in front of him. Not now. Not when she had a chance to make things right. He turned away from her, looking out the window as if trying to avoid the conversation. "I'm not the same person anymore," he said quietly. "I've changed. And so have you. We can't go back to what we were." She felt a pang of pain in her chest, the harsh reality of his words sinking in. He was right. They couldn't go back. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. But still, she couldn't let go of the hope that somehow there could be a way forward. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know I hurt you. I know I ruined everything. But if there's any chance, any possibility that we could start over, I'll do anything. I just need you to know how sorry I am." He turned back to face her, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, there was silence, an understanding passing between them. It was as if time had slowed, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved. "I wish I could believe that," he said softly, "but I'm not sure I can." Her heart shattered at his words. She knew it was true. He had moved on. He had found a new life, a new purpose, and she was just a distant memory to him now. There was no going back. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted you to know how much I regret it. How much I regret losing you." He looked at her one last time, his gaze softening just a fraction. "I don't know if there's any way for us to fix this," he said quietly, "but I hope you find what you're looking for." With those words, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her heart heavy with regret. As she watched him leave, she realized the truth. She had lost him. The man she had once loved, the man who had meant everything to her, was gone. And no matter how much she regretted her actions, no matter how much she wished she could turn back time, the truth was undeniable. They could never go back to what they had been. The past was gone, and with it, the love they had shared. The weight of the moment hung heavily in the air as she stood before him, her heart racing with a mix of hope and fear. She had thought about this moment for years, rehearsed the words 1,000 times, but now that it was real, she found herself at a loss for what to say. The past few weeks had been a blur of emotions: guilt, regret, and the constant question of whether it was even possible to fix the broken pieces of what they once had. She had lived with the ache of that decision, the one where she had chosen wealth over love, security over passion. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, a man who had changed in ways she hadn't even realized. His eyes, once full of warmth and affection, were now cold and guarded. He wasn't the same man she had left behind. Time had reshaped him, just as it had reshaped her. His silence was deafening, and the look in his eyes made her question if there was any hope left at all. She had made her choice all those years ago, and in doing so, she had shattered everything. Now, she had to face the consequences. "I need to know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Will you ever forgive me?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. He stood there, his gaze fixed on her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped moving, as if time had frozen in that single, agonizing moment. She could feel the weight of her own mistakes bearing down on her. Every word she had said to justify her actions seemed like a lie now. She had thought she was making the right choice back then, but the truth had become clear over the years. What she had gained in material wealth, she had lost in love, in trust, in everything that truly mattered. He had given her everything: his love, his heart, his dreams. And she had walked away from it all, chasing after a future that now felt empty and hollow. His silence continued to stretch between them, each passing second feeling like a lifetime. She wanted to reach out, to beg him to speak, to tell her that there was a chance for them. But she knew deep down that it wasn't that simple. Trust had been broken. The foundation of their relationship had crumbled under the weight of her choices. "I don't know," he finally spoke, his voice low, but there was a hardness to it that she hadn't expected. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." The words stung like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She had always known that forgiveness wasn't something that could be given easily, especially not after what she had done. But hearing him say it so plainly made her heart ache in ways she hadn't prepared for. She had always believed that love could conquer anything, that forgiveness was always possible. But now, in the face of his pain, she realized how much she had underestimated the damage she had caused. I know I don't deserve it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I need you to know how sorry I am. I can't change the past, but I would do anything to make it right. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but it was gone before she could hold on to it. I wanted to believe that too, he said quietly. But I've spent so many years trying to forget the way you left me, trying to move on. I've built a life without you in it, and I'm not sure if I can tear all of that down again. The pain in his voice was evident, and it cut through her like a knife. She had never understood the depth of his hurt until now, never realized the toll her decision had taken on him. She had thought about her regrets, about how she had missed him, but she had never truly stopped to consider how deeply her actions had scarred him. I don't want to tear anything down, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I just want a chance to rebuild what we lost, to show you that I'm not the same person I was back then. He turned away from her, his shoulders tense, as if the very act of facing her was too much for him. You don't get it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You had your chance. You made your choice. And I've spent years picking up the pieces of my life without you in it. I can't just forget everything and pretend it never happened. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried too many tears over the years, tears that had never brought him back, tears that had never been enough to erase the hurt. Please, she whispered, stepping closer to him. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that I've changed. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know that I would do anything to make things right. He didn't turn around, but she could feel the conflict within him. His body was rigid, as if he were fighting some internal battle. She knew he was torn, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a chance, after all. I don't know, he repeated, his voice strained. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I'm willing to think about it. Maybe there's a way forward, but I can't promise anything. Her heart soared at his words, but she knew better than to get her hopes up too high. She had hurt him too much for him to just let go of his pain. But for the first time in years, there was a sliver of light, a chance for something more. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. That's all I can ask for. And with those words, she knew that whatever happened next, it would be the beginning of a new chapter. Whether it was the end of their story, or the start of a new one, she had no idea. But she was ready to face it, whatever the outcome. Because now, for the first time, she understood what it meant to truly fight for something worth having. And she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. The news broke like wildfire. Within hours, the story was everywhere, splashed across every news outlet, social media platform, and tabloid. The headlines were bold, sensational, and full of intrigue, leaving the public hooked and craving more. She had always known that her past decisions had consequences, but nothing could have prepared her for the media storm that would erupt when her past was exposed to the world. The once private moments of her life, the choices she had made in the name of love, wealth, and ambition, were now being dissected and analyzed by strangers with no knowledge of the true story. The public's perception of her was shifting rapidly. From the woman who had once been the envy of many, the one who had it all, the wealth, the fame, the perfect life, she was now a figure of scandal, the object of pity and judgment. Her face was on every news channel, her name trending worldwide, but not in the way she had ever hoped. She had become the subject of every gossip column, the latest sensation in the tabloids. The images of her once perfect life were now turned upside down. The very thing she had tried so hard to hide, her betrayal, her decision to leave behind the man who had once loved her, was now being used against her in the most public way possible. The whispers behind her back had turned into a loud, unrelenting storm. She had hoped to move on from her past to build a new future, but now every step she took felt like it was being watched, judged, and criticized. It was impossible to escape the media frenzy. The pressure was overwhelming. Every interview, every public appearance, seemed to only fuel the fire. making things worse. People who had once admired her now turned their backs, their judgment clouded by the scandal that had erupted. Her family, her friends, even her colleagues, everyone had an opinion on her actions, and they weren't afraid to voice it. The public's perception was shifting rapidly. Some saw her as a villain, a woman who had chosen wealth over love, a woman who had made a mistake so catastrophic that it could never be forgiven. Others sympathized with her, believing that she had been trapped by circumstances, that she had made a choice out of necessity rather than desire. The media had created two factions: the ones who thought she deserved to be punished for her betrayal, and the ones who believed she deserved a second chance. But no matter how much she tried to explain herself, the judgment remained. Every word she said was scrutinized, every move she made analyzed under the microscope of public opinion. She had been reduced to a symbol of scandal, a woman who had fallen from grace in front of the entire world. But even in the face of the relentless media storm, there was one person who remained largely silent, the man she had once abandoned. He had become a figure of mystery, his own life now surrounded by secrecy and speculation. His silence only fueled the media frenzy, making people wonder whether he would ever speak out, whether he would defend her or expose her for the person she had been. His silence became a weapon, and the media pounced on it. They twisted his every word, interpreted his every action, and created a narrative that suited their needs. Was he the one who had been wronged, or was he the one keeping secrets? The public couldn't decide, and the more they speculated, the more the scandal grew. She found herself at the center of a storm she could no longer control. The media was hungry for more, digging into her past, uncovering every detail of her life that had been hidden from view. Her relationships, her choices, her mistakes, all of it was laid bare for the world to see. Nothing was off limits. The media frenzy intensified with each passing day. Every paparazzi photo, every leaked story, only added fuel to the fire. She couldn't escape it. Even in the privacy of her own home, she felt the weight of the scandal following her. Her phone rang constantly, with calls from reporters, journalists, and even family members. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Everyone wanted to hear her side of the story. But she wasn't sure she had an answer. What could she say that hadn't already been said 100 times over? The truth, the real truth, was so complex, so layered, that she wasn't sure how to even begin explaining it. She had made mistakes. Huge mistakes. But she had never meant for it to end this way. The media didn't care about the nuances, about the reasons behind her actions. They only cared about the story, the drama, the scandal, and they weren't interested in forgiveness. As the pressure mounted, she began to feel like she was drowning in it all. The weight of the public's judgment, the constant scrutiny, and the relentless questions had taken a toll on her. She had built her life on a foundation of success, fame, and fortune. But now that very foundation was crumbling beneath her. Every decision she made, every move she took was being dissected by the world. She could feel the eyes of the world on her, judging her, waiting for her to falter. But she refused to give in. She had been through too much to let this moment define her. Despite the public backlash, despite the pain and humiliation, she knew that she had to fight for herself. She had to stand tall, face the truth, and prove that she was more than the scandal the media had painted her to be. She had to find a way to reclaim her narrative, to regain control of her own story. But it wasn't going to be easy. The public had already made up their minds. The media had already written the story. And now, she had to figure out how to live in a world that was constantly judging her, constantly watching her every move. She had always been in control of her destiny, but now, it seemed like the world had taken that control away from her. It was up to her to take it back. The battle wasn't just about the scandal, the media, or public opinion. It was about reclaiming herself, her life, and her future. She had to prove that she was more than the mistakes of her past, that she was more than the judgment of others. She had to show the world that she could rise above it all and come out stronger on the other side. And with every challenge, every setback, She knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let the media frenzy define her. She would take control of her own story, no matter the cost. The calm that had descended after the media frenzy was suddenly shattered by an unexpected twist, one that no one could have predicted. Just when it seemed like the storm had passed and things were settling down, a shocking revelation emerged, one that turned everything on its head. The truth, hidden deep beneath layers of lies and half-truths, was finally brought into the light. This revelation was not just a piece of gossip or speculation. It was a game-changer, one that would alter the course of their lives forever. It was the kind of twist that left everyone stunned, including the very people who thought they knew everything about the situation. The revelation came from an unexpected source, someone whose connection to the story had been kept under wraps until now. A mysterious figure, long forgotten in the shadows, suddenly appeared with the truth. Truths that no one had seen coming, not even the man who had been at the center of the storm. He had always thought he knew everything there was to know about the situation, that the decisions made in the past were final. But now, with this new information, everything he had believed was called into question. The story he had lived for so long, the one he had built his life around, was suddenly rewritten. He wasn't just a man abandoned for wealth. He was a key figure in a much bigger story. This revelation shook him to his core. He had always believed that his life had been marked by a single, defining moment, the day she chose another man over him. But now, with this new twist, everything had changed. He was no longer the victim of a love story gone wrong. He was the one holding the power. The man who had once been the symbol of heartbreak and betrayal was now in control. And with that power came a sense of responsibility he had never expected. The woman who had left him, the one who had broken his heart, was now at his mercy. But what would he do with this newfound power? Would he take revenge, or would he do something completely unexpected? The choice was his, and the weight of that decision was heavy. The revelation also hit her harder than she could have imagined. She had thought that the past was behind her, that she could continue living her life as if nothing had happened. But now, she was faced with a truth that she couldn't deny. A truth that made her question everything she had ever believed. The man she had left behind wasn't just a poor man anymore. He wasn't the same person she had walked away from. He had transformed, not just in terms of wealth, but in his identity, his power, and his understanding of the world. This man, whom she had once discarded, had become someone greater, someone more than she could have ever imagined. And now, with this revelation, she realized the true cost of her decisions. The shame and guilt she felt were overwhelming. She had chosen wealth over love, but now, she saw that the love she had once thrown away was worth far more than anything money could buy. But the question remained, was it too late for redemption? Could she undo the damage she had caused, or was the past too far gone to change? The media, of course, couldn't resist the drama of it all. They quickly picked up on the new revelation, turning it into the next big story. The world was watching as the truth came out, and the public's perception of her and the man she had left was changing once again. The twist had added another layer to the saga, one that no one could have anticipated. The public was divided, some sympathizing with her, others condemning her for the choices she had made. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that this revelation had shifted the balance of power. The man she had once discarded was no longer the same person. He was now a force to be reckoned with, and his next move would decide the fate of everyone involved. Would he choose to forgive her, or would he seek retribution for the pain she had caused? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The game had changed. The truth was no longer a secret, and everyone involved would have to face the consequences of their actions. As the story unfolded, it became clear that the path to redemption was not going to be easy. The man who had once been abandoned was now in control of his destiny, and the woman who had left him was left to wonder if she could ever regain his trust, or if the damage was irreparable. The revelation had left them both standing on the edge of a cliff, with no way of knowing what the future held. But one thing was for sure. The journey ahead would be full of twists and turns, and the stakes had never been higher. The truth had finally come to light, and there was no turning back now. The past had been rewritten, and the future was uncertain. All they could do was face the consequences of their choices, and figure out how to move forward in a world where everything had changed. It had been a journey filled with pain, regret, and uncertainty, but at long last, everything was leading up to this moment. The man who had once been rejected, who had endured endless heartache and betrayal, was about to make a grand gesture that would leave the world in awe. His love for her had never truly died, no matter how many times she had turned her back on him. Despite everything that had happened, despite the pain she had caused him, he was still in love with her. This wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was deep, it was real, and it was undeniable. But now, it wasn't just about love anymore. It was about making a statement, about showing her and the world that love could conquer anything, that it could survive even the deepest wounds and the harshest betrayals. He had been quiet for too long, watching from the sidelines as she lived her life, thinking she had made the right choice. But now, as time had passed and things had changed, he realized something important. She was his destiny, and no amount of pride or ego would stand in his way. He had come a long way from the poor man she had once rejected. He had worked tirelessly, rebuilt his life, and transformed himself into a force to be reckoned with. But none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was her. His grand gesture wasn't about showing off his wealth or status. It was about showing her that he was willing to go to any lengths to prove that love, real love, could defy all odds. The grand gesture he had in mind would be one that no one could ignore. It would be a moment so powerful, so unexpected, that it would make the world stop and take notice. He wasn't just going to win her back. He was going to remind her of what they once had, of the love that had been there all along, buried under years of mistakes and misunderstandings. The woman who had once walked away from him was about to face a truth that she could no longer deny. Love wasn't about money, status, or appearances. It was about the heart, and his heart had never stopped beating for her. She, on the other hand, had built her life around wealth, security, and the illusion of happiness. She had thought that choosing the rich man over him was the right decision, that it would give her everything she wanted. But now, as time passed, and the cracks in her perfect life began to show, she realized how wrong she had been. Despite everything she had gained, there was still something missing, something that money could never replace, and that something was him. When she received the invitation for the grand gesture, she had no idea what to expect. She thought it was just another moment in the long saga of their story, another twist she would have to face. But as she arrived at the location, her heart began to race. This wasn't just any ordinary gesture. It was something that would change everything. She was about to witness the man she had once rejected in a way she had never seen before. The man who had been lost in the shadows, whose love for her had been misunderstood, was now stepping into the spotlight. The grand gesture was everything she had never expected. It was bold, it was emotional, and it was powerful. It wasn't about lavish gifts or grand displays of wealth. It was about something deeper, something that spoke directly to her heart. He didn't need to prove anything to her in terms of money or success. What he was showing her now was the depth of his love, the strength of his character, and the sincerity of his feelings. The moment was overwhelming. As the grand gesture unfolded, she couldn't help but feel a surge of emotions. She was torn between the guilt of what she had done to him and the undeniable pull of the love that had always been there. It was as if all the walls she had built around her heart were crumbling, and she was finally seeing him for who he truly was, the man who had always been worthy of her love. The gesture was a declaration of everything he had fought for: his love for her, his perseverance, and his unwavering belief in their connection. It was a bold statement to the world that love could survive even the harshest of trials, that true love wasn't bound by social status, wealth, or power. It was something far more profound. She stood there, speechless, as the grand gesture unfolded before her eyes. She had never imagined that it would be like this, that he would go to such lengths to show her that he still cared. But as she watched him, as she saw the sincerity in his eyes, she realized something important. He had always been the one. The man she had let go was the one who had always been meant for her. The grand gesture was more than just a way to win her back. It was a reminder of what she had lost, and more importantly, what she still had the chance to regain. The world around them seemed to fade as they stood there, the tension palpable, the moment hanging in the air. What would she do now? Would she let her pride keep her from accepting the love that had never truly left her? Or would she take the chance to make things right, to reclaim the love she had let slip away? The grand gesture was the final test, the last opportunity to change the course of their story. The decision was hers, and as the world waited for her response, everything seemed to stand still. Would she embrace the love that had never wavered, or would she let it slip away for good? The grand gesture had set the stage for a new beginning, a chance for redemption, and a moment of truth that would define their future. The answer was now in her hands. As we come to the end of this intense journey, I want to leave you with a question. A question that might stir your emotions and make you reflect on your own choices. Imagine being in their shoes. What would you have done? If you were the woman who walked away from love in search of wealth, would you have made the same decision again? Or would you have chosen love over money? Or if you were the man who was left behind, would you have forgiven the woman who chose a life of luxury over you? Would you have let go of the past? Or would the wounds of betrayal have been too deep to heal? Would you have chosen to forgive or walk away forever? We've seen their journey unfold, full of twists, turns, heartache, and second chances. But now it's your turn to think. What would you have done in their place? We all face moments in life where we have to make decisions that shape our futures. Some are based on emotions, some on logic, and some on circumstances beyond our control. But the question remains, when it comes down to love versus wealth, how far would you go? Would you sacrifice everything for love, or would you think about your future security first? This isn't just a story about a man and a woman. This is a story about choices, consequences, and redemption. About realizing that true love isn't just about wealth. It's about choosing each other, even when things are uncertain. When you don't have all the answers. When life doesn't go as planned. The real test is whether you can hold on to each other despite the obstacles. If you were in his place, would you have forgiven her for walking away? Would you have had the courage to confront her and give her a second chance? Or would your pride have been too great to let go of the past? And if you were her, standing there, seeing the man you left behind become everything you once wanted, would you regret your decision? Would you find the courage to apologize? Or would your ego keep you from admitting you made a mistake? Life is full of these types of moments, decisions that seem impossible but define who we are and what we stand for. Sometimes the hardest decision is not to walk away from someone you love but to admit you were wrong. It's about humility, growth, and forgiveness. The question isn't just about love. It's about learning from our past and making better choices moving forward. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in their shoes? Would you have chosen love or money? Would you have forgiven or walked away for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share your perspective, and let's talk about what we'd all do in such a situation. The beauty of this story is that it's not just theirs, it's universal. We all face moments in life where we have to choose between what's easy and what's right, between following our hearts and thinking about our future. True love isn't about wealth or possessions, but about finding that person who makes you better, who challenges you, and who stays by your side even when everything falls apart. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Don't forget to leave your comments below. Your thoughts are what make this conversation real. What would you have done?